welcome back to my channel. So in this video I'm just going to carry on reviewing Emily Katie's Girl Unmasked, carrying on from my other videos, just reading through the notes I made and sort of comparing it to my own experience. So in my previous video I just got up to the bit where she had said that she's ended up in a psychiatric hospital, and she's then sectioned under the Mental Health Act after harming herself when she had to hand over a favourite diary which had a ring binder and wasn't allowed. It wasn't allowed in case it might harm others, I guess, because it had a ring binder. She had been crying and screaming over it. She said that she now knows that she was sectioned because she was autistic, because she couldn't give up her diary, an object she had become so hyperfixated on that she couldn't function without it. But she was called overdramatic and hysterical. She said that she makes 3 friendships on the ward with other patients. She talks about her fixations, increased distress at disruptions to routine and change, intolerance for noise. It's interesting in her diary that she often makes quite what I would consider to be quite astute sort of social observations. For example, she says she refers to one of her friends, she describes one of her friends by saying that, I quote, "Her eyes are filled with kindness, but a deep sadness lingers there too." I just thought that was quite interesting because coming from an autistic person, because autism obviously does impact your ability to observe other people's emotions. I personally don't really get any meaning out of someone's eyes. Not really. I mean, I don't really kind of pay too much attention to someone's eyes beyond their colour. It just seems interesting that she made that observation, and I was reading it, I was thinking, you know, that's quite, for an autistic person, that's quite unusual, I would say, to be able to kind of take that information from someone's eyes. So I just wondered if any of you could do that, because I certainly couldn't do that. I don't know if I don't know whether how accurate that was in terms of, was she just kind of putting that in her memoir to sort of make it a bit more poetic. Maybe her editor said something about that, I don't know. But yeah, it's not something that I would put if I was writing a memoir, because I don't really pay attention to what's in someone's eyes. I wouldn't really know what they're feeling. She also said that, referring to her friends on the ward, she said, I quote, "We recognise each other's discomfort, sometimes before we recognise our own." Again, for an autistic person, that seems quite unusual, because that requires sort of theory of mind and that ability to sort of recognise what's going on for someone. That's not something I don't think I would pick up. I mean, that's not to say I don't pick up other people's emotions. I do, and they do affect me. Definitely, I would actually say I'm pretty sensitive to other people's emotions, in the sense I do pick up on them, but I'm not good at sort of knowing how to deal with that, or sort of labelling it accurately, I guess. But I just thought that was interesting. So she talks about how a doctor asks to speak to her about her question about autism while she's on the ward. And that's because her parents and Emily raised the question of autism with him. Her auntie has been pushing it, having noticed similarities between Emily and her cousin, who was diagnosed autistic age 4. I think that's her male cousin who was diagnosed autistic age 4. Emily thought the suggestion was absurd when she first thought about it, until, that is, she met a girl on the unit who told her she had autism. And she didn't seem to have autism in the way that Emily had envisaged it. She was very similar to Emily, so that made Emily start to think, oh, well, if this girl is autistic and is very similar to herself, and yet didn't appear to have the autism in the way Emily had thought autism looked like, then maybe she herself had it. And she had also heard that OCD and autism could be linked. So after a bit of sort of encouragement from her auntie, the parent of her autistic cousin, her parents had met with a consultant to talk about Emily's childhood years. And now the speciality doctor was feeding back on a meeting, and he said to Emily, he said, "I don't think you are autistic. I think you just have high social anxiety." Emily had written a list of reasons why I could be autistic, which I think she had also presented to the doctor. And then she makes a comment, she says, in her book, she says, "Really," she says, "is there anything more autistic," she says, "than writing a list of the reasons why you think you could be autistic?" That's interesting. I wouldn't say, personally, it's just my own observation, I wouldn't say that writing lists in and of itself points to autism, because after all, many people like writing lists for all sorts of reasons. That in and of itself is just a sort of trait, a sort of a liking, for writing lists. Lots of people like writing lists. I would say in and of itself, that doesn't make a beast, that doesn't make someone autistic. So I thought that was interesting that she seemed to think her writing a list in and of itself was kind of an autistic thing, which personally I wouldn't say that in and of itself is diagnostic. So she writes this list anyway of why she thinks she was autistic. She says, for example, and she puts it in sort of bullet points. This is the list. She says, "I've always seemed to find things harder than other kids my age. I often get confused by instructions." Well, I can relate to that. I too also often got confused by instructions. That's can occur. That's a transdiagnostic thing, not just specific to autism. Lots of conditions have that as a potential trait. But yes, I can relate to that. I get overwhelmed easily. Yeah, same. She talks about the link between autism and OCD. She describes herself as being a perfectionist. She always needs to be in control. She struggles with change. She grew up copying fictional characters to know how to behave in social situations. She was bullied for not fitting in. She's too anxious. She doesn't like loud noises. She struggles to wear certain materials. And she has always felt different. But she also writes another list called "Reasons Why I Can't Be Autistic." And in this list, she says that she was a well-behaved child. She had lots of friends. Very interesting indeed. Friendship was one of the things I really, really struggled with. So that's interesting to me. It's a completely different experience to me. Like I say, there are many traits that Emily has that I have too. Many of them to be seen in that previous list I read out. But and I had pretty much all of the ones in that previous list on why she could be autistic. The first list she wrote out. But on the list where she wrote reasons why she might not be, when she writes, "I have lots of friends," that's just interesting because I really, really struggled with friendship. That was one of the biggest kind of autistic problems I experienced. Anyway, she can make eye contact. She makes good eye contact. That's different to me. I struggle with eye contact. So again, different experience there. I can make it sometimes, and it does vary. It's highly variable. It's not so I can't make it, because I do, but it is a difficulty nonetheless. She says she's very empathetic. Completely different to me. That's something I've always struggled with. That's not to say I don't care, but it is true that I have always struggled with certain aspects of empathy. It's a different term. I certainly wouldn't describe myself as very empathetic. She talks a lot. I mean, I wouldn't say that in and of itself is a reason why someone can't be autistic. Talking a lot can actually be part of autism for some people, particularly if you like monologuing. That's interesting. She puts that as one of the reasons why she can't be. She doesn't like maths or science. And on for unit, she was so those are the reasons that she says. On a unit, she was diagnosed with generalised anxiety disorder and mixed personality disorder. Emotionally unstable, that's what used to be borderline, by the way, what used to be called borderline personality, and anancastic, that's the word, type, obsessive, which is now called obsessive compulsive personality disorder. That's completely different to OCD, by the way. It's kind of a bit confusing that it shares the same kind of name. Maybe you should give it a different name because it's completely different to OCD. So she talks about her emotionally unstable personality disorder, and she says it's a stigmatised illness. It causes intense and unstable emotions, impulsive behaviours, anger, difficulty making and keeping relationships, recurrent suicidal behaviour, and chronic feelings of emptiness. It's interesting that, yes, Emily does seem to have displayed all of those behaviours. Certainly while reading a book, I would say that does seem to fit her. But I don't think Emily accepts that diagnosis. She sees autism as kind of replacing it, which is interesting. I think she sees that as a misdiagnosis. She also talks about OCD-PD, which causes extreme perfectionism, rigidity, order, neatness, and inflexibility. And again, you could maybe see in some of those features she was talking about earlier, such as extreme perfectionism, that could easily tie into that. So she was diagnosed with these things on the ward, but Emily doesn't seem to think they fit her, which is interesting. But I don't know, maybe she does have those conditions. I think sometimes people don't want to be associated with these disorders because of the stigma. That's not to say she's not also autistic, but it's just interesting that she rejects those other diagnoses as well. And they could explain some of her rather idiosyncratic behaviours that maybe are a little bit not stereotypical of autism. Okay, I'm going to move over to video number 2 now to carry on this review. So, video number 2.